It was a quiet evening at Mar-a-Lago. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the sprawling estate. Donald Trump sat in his study, surrounded by the opulence that had become synonymous with his name. The room was filled with the faint hum of the air conditioning, the occasional rustle of papers, and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere. Earlier that day, he had received a phone call from an old friend, a retired general who had served with distinction in multiple conflicts. The general's voice had been heavy with concern as he spoke about a military hospital in Washington, D.C. The facility, once a beacon of hope and healing for wounded soldiers, was now struggling to stay afloat. Budget cuts, outdated equipment, and a lack of essential supplies had turned the hospital into a shadow of its former self. The general had painted a grim picture. Soldiers, many of whom had sacrificed so much for their country, were now suffering due to the very system they had sworn to protect. Trump had listened intently, his usual bravado momentarily replaced by a rare silence. He had always held a deep respect for the military, often speaking of his admiration for those who served. But this was different. This wasn't about politics or public perception. This was about real people, real suffering, and a system that had failed them. As he sat in his study, the weight of the general's words pressed heavily on him. He thought about the soldiers, many of them young, who had returned home with physical and emotional scars. He thought about the doctors and nurses who worked tirelessly to mend broken bodies and spirits, only to be hamstrung by a lack of resources. And he thought about what it meant to truly serve one's country, not just in words, but in actions. By the time the moon had risen high in the sky, Trump had made up his mind. He would go to the hospital himself. Not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but because it was the right thing to do. He called his head of security, instructing him to arrange a discreet visit. There would be no press, no fanfare. Just him, his security detail, and a desire to help. The next morning, as the sun began its ascent, Trump's motorcade pulled out of Mar-a-Lago. The journey to Washington was uneventful, the miles passing by in a blur of highways and cityscapes. As they approached the hospital, Trump felt a mix of emotions, determination, concern, and a faint sense of apprehension. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that whatever he found, he would do whatever it took to make a difference. The hospital loomed into view, its once proud facade now showing signs of wear and neglect. Trump stepped out of the car, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the few people outside. He nodded to his security team, signaling them to stay back. This was something he needed to do on his own. As he walked through the doors of the hospital, he was struck by the stark contrast between the outside world and the reality within. The walls were bare, the equipment outdated, and the air thick with a sense of resignation. But amidst the gloom, there was also a quiet resilience, a determination to carry on, no matter the odds. Trump took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to meet the people who had inspired this journey. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he was here to help, and he wouldn't leave until he had made a difference. The moment Donald Trump stepped into the hospital, the atmosphere shifted. The staff, initially caught off guard by his unexpected arrival, quickly gathered their composure. Word spread like wildfire through the corridors: the former president was here. But this wasn't the Trump they had seen on television, loud, brash, and always in the spotlight. This was a different one who moved with purpose and a quiet intensity. He was greeted by the hospital's director, Dr. Emily Carter, a woman in her late 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a deep commitment to her patients. She extended her hand, her expression a mix of surprise and cautious optimism. "Mr. Trump, this is unexpected," she said, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "Call me Donald," he replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I heard about the situation here, and I wanted to see it for myself. No cameras, no politics. Just me." Dr. Carter nodded, her initial skepticism giving way to a glimmer of hope. She led him through the hospital, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead as they walked. The corridors were lined with patients, some in wheelchairs, others leaning on crutches, their faces etched with pain and resilience. Trump paused frequently, shaking hands, offering words of encouragement, and listening intently to their stories. One of the first patients he met was Sergeant James Miller, a young man who had lost his leg in an IED explosion overseas. Miller's eyes widened as Trump approached, but the former president quickly put him at ease. "How are you holding up, Sergeant?" Trump asked, his tone genuine. Miller hesitated, then sighed. "It's been tough, sir. The physical therapy here is good, but we're short on equipment. Sometimes, we have to wait our turn just to use the machines. And the prosthetics. Well, let's just say they're not exactly cutting edge." Trump listened, his expression growing more serious with each word. He turned to Dr. Carter. "Is this true? Are you under-resourced?" She nodded, her frustration evident. "We've been struggling for years, Mr. Trump. Budget cuts have hit us hard. We're doing the best we can, but it's not enough. Our equipment is outdated, our facilities are crumbling, and we're constantly running out of basic supplies. It's a miracle we've been able to keep going this long." Trump's jaw tightened as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. He continued his tour, stopping to speak with nurses, doctors, and patients alike. Each conversation revealed another layer of the hospital struggles: leaking ceilings, malfunctioning MRI machines, a shortage of essential medications, and a staff stretched to their limits. In one of the wards, he met Captain Sarah Mitchell, a veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. She was recovering from a traumatic brain injury, her once sharp mind now clouded by confusion and frustration. "I just want to get better," she said, her voice trembling. "But it feels like the system has forgotten about us. We gave everything for our country, and now it's like we don't matter." Her words struck a chord with Trump. He knelt beside her bed, his usual bravado replaced by a rare vulnerability. "You matter," he said firmly. "And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." As the tour continued, Trump's initial shock gave way to a growing sense of determination. He saw the cracks in the walls, the peeling paint, the outdated equipment, and the weary faces of the staff. But he also saw something else: resilience. Despite the challenges, the people here were fighting, for themselves, for each other, and for the ideals they had sworn to protect. By the time he reached the hospital's administrative office, Trump had a clear picture of what needed to be done. He sat down with Dr. Carter and a few senior staff members, his demeanor focused and businesslike. "This place is a disgrace," he said bluntly. "But it's not your fault. You've been let down by the people who should have had your back. Well, that changes today." He pulled out his phone and began making calls, his voice commanding and authoritative. Within hours, he had arranged for a team of contractors to assess the hospital's infrastructure, ordered a shipment of state-of-the-art medical equipment, and secured funding for additional staff and resources. The staff watched in awe as he worked, his energy and determination reigniting a sense of hope that had long been dormant. As the day drew to a close, Trump stood in the hospital's courtyard, looking up at the building that had become a symbol of both neglect and resilience. He knew this was just the beginning. There was still much to be done, but for the first time in a long time, the people inside those walls felt seen. "We're going to fix this," he said to Dr. Carter, his voice firm. "Every last bit of it." She smiled, a rare moment of relief breaking through her usually stoic demeanor. "Thank you, Mr. Trump, for coming here. For listening. For caring." He nodded, his gaze steady. "This isn't about me. It's about them," he said, gesturing to the hospital. "They deserve better. And we're going to make sure they get it." As he left the hospital that evening, the weight of the day's revelations lingered in his mind. But so did a sense of purpose. He had come here to help, and he wasn't going to stop until the job was done. A month had passed since Donald Trump's initial visit to the military hospital. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of renewal as his motorcade pulled up to the once dilapidated building. This time, however, the scene that greeted him was almost unrecognizable. The hospital, which had been a symbol of neglect and struggle, now stood as a testament to what could be achieved with determination, resources, and a collective will to make a difference. As Trump stepped out of the car, he paused for a moment, taking in the sight before him. The exterior of the building had been completely refurbished. The cracked walls were now smooth and freshly painted, the windows gleamed in the sunlight, and a new sign above the entrance proudly displayed the hospital's name. The courtyard, once overgrown and neglected, was now a welcoming space with benches, flower beds, and a small memorial dedicated to the soldiers who had passed through its doors. Trump's security team followed closely behind as he approached the entrance, but he waved them off. "I'll be fine," he said, his voice carrying a rare note of humility. "This is their moment, not mine." As he walked through the doors, he was immediately struck by the transformation. The dim, flickering lights had been replaced with bright, energy-efficient fixtures. The walls, once bare and peeling, were now adorned with artwork and photographs celebrating the hospital's history and the bravery of its patients. The air no longer carried the faint scent of mildew but was fresh and clean, a reflection of the new HVAC system that had been installed. The reception area was bustling with activity, but the moment Trump entered, the room fell silent. Then, one by one, the staff and patients began to applaud. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "welcome back. I don't think words can express how much your help has meant to all of us." Trump shook her hand, his usual bravado softened by the genuine warmth in the room. "I told you we'd fix this place," he said with a smile. "But it's not me you should be thanking. It's all of you, your hard work, your dedication, your resilience. That's what made this possible." He was quickly surrounded by staff and patients, each eager to share their gratitude and show him the changes that had taken place. Sergeant James Miller, the young man Trump had met on his first visit, approached him with a confident stride, his new state-of-the-art prosthetic leg allowing him to move with ease. "Look at this," Miller said, tapping his prosthetic. "Because of you, I've got a second chance. I can walk again, and I'm even starting to run. It's like I've got my life back." Trump clasped Miller's shoulder, his expression one of quiet pride. "You earned this, Sergeant. Never forget that." Captain Sarah Mitchell was next. Her recovery had been remarkable, and the confusion and frustration that had clouded her mind were now replaced with clarity and determination. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady and strong. "You gave us hope when we needed it most." As Trump continued his tour, he saw firsthand the impact of the changes he had set in motion. The physical therapy room, once cramped and under-equipped, was now a spacious, state-of-the-art facility filled with cutting-edge machines. The MRI machine, which had been malfunctioning, had been replaced with the latest model, allowing for faster and more accurate diagnoses. The pharmacy was fully stocked, ensuring that patients had access to the medications they needed. In the newly renovated cafeteria, Trump sat down with a group of patients and staff, listening to their stories and sharing a few of his own. The atmosphere was light and joyful, a stark contrast to the heaviness that had permeated the hospital just a month earlier. "You know," Trump said, leaning back in his chair, "I've been in a lot of places, seen a lot of things. But this is something special. You've all shown what can happen when people come together and refuse to give up." Dr. Carter nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just about the building or the equipment, Mr. Trump. It's about the people. You reminded us that we matter, that our work matters. And that's made all the difference." As the visit drew to a close, Trump stood in the hospital's courtyard once more, this time surrounded by the staff and patients who had become a part of his journey. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the scene. "I'll be back," he said, his voice carrying a note of promise. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. We're going to keep fighting, not just for this hospital, but for every soldier, every veteran, who deserves the best care this country can offer." The crowd erupted into applause, their gratitude and hope echoing in the crisp autumn air. As Trump climbed back into his car, he took one last look at the hospital, now a beacon of hope and healing. He knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond politics or personal gain. This was about people. And as he drove away, he knew he would do whatever it took to make sure their voices were heard. In the months that followed, Donald Trump's visits to the military hospital became a regular occurrence. What had started as a single act of compassion had blossomed into a deep, personal commitment. He no longer saw the hospital as just a project or a cause. It had become a part of his life, a place where he could make a tangible difference. His visits were never announced in advance. He preferred to arrive unannounced, often early in the morning or late in the evening, when the hustle and bustle of the day had settled. He wanted to see the hospital as it truly was, not as a staged performance for his benefit. Each time he walked through the doors, he was greeted with the same warmth and gratitude, but he always made it clear that he wasn't there for the accolades. He was there to help. On one such visit, Trump arrived just as the sun was rising. The hospital was quiet, the hallways bathed in the soft glow of dawn. He made his way to the physical therapy room, where Sergeant James Miller was already hard at work, pushing himself through a series of exercises on the new equipment. "You're here early," Trump remarked, leaning against the doorway. Miller looked up, a grin spreading across his face. "Could say the same about you, sir." Trump chuckled, stepping into the room. "How's the leg holding up?" "Better than ever," Miller replied, tapping his prosthetic. "Thanks to you, I'm back on my feet, literally. I've even started training for a marathon." "A marathon?" Trump raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That's no small feat." "Neither was fixing this place," Miller said, his tone turning serious. "You didn't have to do this, you know. But you did. And it's changed everything." Trump nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. But don't give me too much credit. You're the one putting in the work. I just gave you the tools." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Carter, who looked as though she hadn't slept in days. Despite her exhaustion, her eyes lit up when she saw Trump. "Mr. Trump," she said, extending her hand. "I didn't know you were coming today." "I like to keep you on your toes," he replied with a smirk. "How's everything going?" Dr. Carter sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Busy. We've had an influx of patients recently, and while the new equipment and staff have been a godsend, we're still stretched thin. But we're managing." Trump's expression grew serious. "What do you need?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "You've already done so much. I can't keep asking for more." "You're not asking," Trump said firmly. "I'm offering. This place matters. The people here matter. So tell me what you need, and I'll make it happen." Dr. Carter's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she was too overwhelmed to speak. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "We could use more funding for mental health services. A lot of our patients are struggling with PTSD, and we don't have enough counselors to meet the demand." Trump nodded, already pulling out his phone. "Consider it done." True to his word, within days, the hospital had secured additional funding for mental health services. A team of experienced counselors was brought in, and new programs were established to support patients dealing with trauma. The impact was immediate and profound, with patients reporting significant improvements in their mental and emotional well-being. Trump's involvement didn't stop at funding. He took a hands-on approach, often spending hours talking to patients, listening to their stories, and offering words of encouragement. He became a familiar face in the hospital, someone the staff and patients could count on. One evening, as he was leaving the hospital, he was approached by a young nurse named Maria. She had been working at the hospital for only a few months but had already become a beloved member of the team. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything." Trump smiled, his usual bravado replaced by a rare softness. "You don't have to thank me. You're the one on the front lines, taking care of these heroes. I'm just doing my part." Maria shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. Before you came here, I was ready to quit. I felt like no one cared, like nothing I did mattered. But seeing what you've done, how much you've changed this place, it's given me hope. It's reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place." Trump placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression one of quiet pride. "You're making a difference, Maria. Never forget that." As the months turned into years, Trump's commitment to the hospital never wavered. He continued to visit regularly, always looking for ways to improve the facility and support the people who called it home. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. The hospital became a model for military healthcare, a shining example of what could be achieved when people came together with a shared purpose. But for Trump, the true reward wasn't the recognition or the accolades. It was the smiles on the faces of the patients, the gratitude in the eyes of the staff, and the knowledge that he had played a part in making their lives a little bit better. As he stood in the hospital's courtyard one final time, looking up at the building that had become a second home, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of wealth or power could ever provide. This was his legacy, not the towers that bore his name, but the lives he had touched and the hope he had restored. "We did it," he said softly, a smile playing on his lips. "We really did it." And with that, he turned and walked away, knowing that his work here was far from over.